Recently, Andrew Cuomo, New York's governor, garnered a lot of negative press when he responded to someone's question by saying that America has never actually been that great and that we are seeking greatness for the first time. It has become something of a talking point on both sides of the aisle that America has always been great and that we should never question that. So he made a major political blunder, which is pretty surprising for a politician of his stature, especially someone who's at least a second generation politician and has been groomed for this his entire life. And a lot of people were saying, well, this will probably really hurt his chances in 2020. I was a little stunned by that assessment because I don't think he had any chances in 2020 to begin with. So today I'd like to take a look at Andrew Cuomo, the never great candidate. As I mentioned, the whole idea of Andrew Cuomo running for president in 2020 had never occurred to me until I read the articles regarding his never great comment. And then I looked at some presidential polls. And there are actually polls where Andrew Cuomo is included as an option, but Bernie Sanders is not. And I want you to let that sink in. Anyway, the problem with Andrew Cuomo is that he really shouldn't be in these polls. He has vocal detractors at home. I know a lot of Democrats from New York. None of them like him. All of them think of him as corrupt. None of them would want to put him on a national stage and expose their state's politics. He's vulnerable on the key issue of corruption. Many polls show that that is a leading issue or the leading issue for many Americans of all political persuasions. And it's also Trump's vulnerable point. After all, Trump ran on cleaning up Washington, draining the swamp, and it's become clear that he is just another politician and he might actually be more corrupt than average. In fact, I'm sort of softballing it a bit. He's definitely more corrupt than average. He's like Warren Harding 2.0. So if you want to have a good Democratic challenger, you need someone who has a good record on corruption, and Andrew Cuomo most certainly does not. If anything, Cuomo is to governors what Trump is to presidents right now. All of his lackeys are going down like flies, and he's trying to pretend that he was in no way involved. It's not great. The only reason he's included in these polls is because he's an establishment Democrat from New York. As we noticed in a previous video, Harry Enton and Chris Cillizza, when they wrote their article, said that what the American people want is a New York versus New York race, and that is fundamentally false. It's also, these are the same kind of geniuses who told us that what Americans are really clamoring for is a Bush versus Clinton round 2 election, basically a rematch by proxy of 1992, and I just don't think that there's any truth in that whatsoever. The other thing you have to know about Andrew Cuomo is that his brother Chris Cuomo is a CNN host and is also an establishment Democrat, but his job is to talk about the Democrats, whereas Andrew's job is to carry water for them in a more active role. However, to be fair to Andrew Cuomo, there was a time when he had a resume that made him look like someone who could potentially run for president and make a reasonably strong bid for that office. So if we look back at the early part of his political career, he served in the Office of Housing and Urban Development under the Clinton administration. From 93 to 97, he was the Assistant Secretary, and then from 97 to 2001, he was the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. So that was a pretty good start. That's something that would really endear him to a lot of urban voters, a lot of the people who are one of the core constituencies of the Democratic Party. So far as I know, he did a decent job in that role. He also had a great deal of success as the anti-corruption state's attorney general in New York. And he actually ran in 2010 as being an anti-corruption candidate who would come in and clean up the mess created by his predecessor. I don't remember the gentleman's name, but the guy was famously corrupt, and basically the Democratic Party had to beg him not to run for a second term. Anyway, so Cuomo came in on the premise of cleaning up New York. However, in 2011, after he took office, he had run a fairly progressive campaign, but his first step was to become a fiscal hawk once he took office. And the first move that he made that really generated waves was when he forced public sector unions to make concessions, which ended pay raises, implemented furloughs, which is basically unpaid leave, and he raised insurance rates for people who are public employees. And those are not things that Democrats are supposed to do, especially not in a deep blue state like New York. However, he got little praise pieces written for him in the New York Times. A lot of establishment Democrats claimed that because of the Tea Party wave, with people like Scott Walker, pictured here, who were union busters extraordinaire, that Andrew Cuomo was just keeping with the times and that he didn't do any structural damage to unions. And if anything, his cracking down on the unions was a pro-union move because it saved them from future depredations. It's a complete bullshit argument. Clearly, Andrew Cuomo is not a pro-union guy. Also in office in his first term, he oversaw the legalization of gay marriage. That seems to be his most lasting achievement and the one which is probably his greatest. He cut property taxes. This seems to have been somewhat of a concession to the rich. He tried to frame it as more of a middle-class small business issue, but it's fairly clear who he was actually aiming it at. He also oversaw a tax reform which included minor tax increases for the rich and cuts for the middle class. So basically, his tax plan was on a state level what Bill Clinton and Barack Obama tried to do on a national level, meaning very, very minor reforms around the edges that occasioned a lot of attention and debate, but didn't actually change anything on a fundamental level. I think some of the critics from the left said that the tax cuts for the middle class did not even add up to a full tank of gas for a month. So we're not talking about big tax cuts for the middle classes, but Andrew Cuomo advertises them that way, even though it's not quite accurate. He also, at one point, was looking to allow fracking. He thought that this would be a boost to the New York economy. It turns out that almost all establishment Democrats are all about drill baby drill, even if they never campaign on it. However, there was a ton of public pressure in New York, and environmental groups eventually convinced him that this would not be good for the state and that it would not be as safe in New York as it was in Pennsylvania due to the conditions of the soil there, or maybe how deep down the oil would be. So he eventually did back down and implemented a fracking ban. But it again is worth noting that he only did so after immense public pressure, which means that his instincts are more for energy development than for environmental protection. So that's worth noting. So again, this is a fairly mixed start. It puts him about in the middle of the Democratic pack. Nothing is completely disqualifying, but nothing is all that encouraging. And certainly he would not be a progressive candidate with this background. There's actually a very good reason why Cuomo's "America was never great" comment never actually mattered. And that's because he was dead in the water because of his corruption. If you'll recall, his main selling point as a gubernatorial candidate was that he is anti-corruption and that he will clean up Albany. Well, that didn't quite work out. So, when he first got in office, as he was doing a little bit of union busting, he decided to renew an Eliot Spitzer-era executive order which prohibited gubernatorial appointees from contributing to the governor. So this obviously would be to curb people from giving kickbacks after they get a cushy political office. Pretty easy to follow. However, somehow Cuomo and his cronies reinterpreted the rules to where you can have this rule in place but still do the practice it's meant to prevent. And I'm not sure how he interpreted these rules. I'd really love to know, but it's clearly required some significant mental jujitsu, and it completely violated the spirit of this executive order. Anyway, he took $890,000 in political contributions from the 24 people he appointed, and then an additional $1.3 million from their closest associates, like their spouses, their children, business partners, etc. And of that money, it's my understanding he only returned about $2,500 from one specific person who was considered suspect. So basically, he got to keep all the money, and that is why he's a two-term governor who has the bankroll to run for a third term. There's also the Buffalo Billion program. He is reinvesting in the city of Buffalo to revitalize the city, and this includes $750 million for a Tesla production plant. However, the problem is that he appointed someone named Elaine Caballeros to head this program. Caballeros is a longtime associate of the Cuomo family. He also worked for Andrew's father, Mario, who was a previous governor. And this guy is mostly known for being the former president of the State University of New York systems. Anyway, this guy is also super corrupt and had a lot of personal interest in the Buffalo area. So, what he and his associates, I think there were a dozen of them or so, have been doing is bid rigging, meaning that they have been making sure that the bidding system is rigged, so that way certain people win, certain people lose, and you can imagine that there are kickbacks involved from the people who are winning these bids. So, anyway, Caballeros and some others have been busted. And Cuomo has been trying to say, well, I actually wasn't directly involved, had no way to know, couldn't possibly have known about this. It looks bad. There's a lot of egg on his face. Everybody knows that he is on the hook for this, but he, so far, has been able to evade any kind of probe. And partly that's because he's a legal expert in his own right. He's a former AG. And he also directs the state's law enforcement. So he's not going down for this, despite the fact that everybody knows who the guy responsible actually is. The reason why I've personally never been able to take Andrew Cuomo very seriously as a contender for national office is because of his conduct when it came to investigating corruption while governor. This was a story that broke back in 2014, and this is the thing that really formed my lasting impression of Andrew Cuomo. So, if you'll recall, back in July of 2013, Cuomo decided to form the Commission to Investigate Public Corruption. And this was a committee which was supposed to restore public trust. If you'll keep in mind, he was running for re-election in 2014, and he needed to be able to show his constituents that he was serious about cleaning up New York and about really making progress. So he set this commission to run until January 1st, and this commission had 20-some members, and they were empowered to look into all kinds of crimes and start prosecutions of them. However, after going after some Republicans in the early going, the commission started to turn its attention to Democrats, especially Democrats linked with Cuomo. And when that happened, Cuomo suddenly warmed up to the demands of Republican state lawmakers that the commission be ended. So Republicans were demanding that the budget cut the funding for that commission, and all of a sudden, Cuomo caved on that point completely. And mysteriously. Anyway, what happened is that Cuomo and the state legislature decided to cut and disband the investigation in March of 2014. And that seemed very politically motivated and suspect, so this drew an entire investigation into Cuomo's conduct from U.S. Attorney Preet Bharara starting in 2014. Preet noted that this was something that clearly looked suspect and looked like it was done for political advantage, and it may have been something that was trying to disguise criminal conduct on the part of Cuomo himself. At any rate, though, after 2 years of investigation, notably over twice as long as Cuomo's probe lasted, Bharara finally cleared Cuomo of any danger of federal prosecution. That being said, he never actually said that Cuomo was innocent, and it's pretty clear from the way that he wrote his brief that he thinks that Cuomo probably is guilty of something, he just can't find the proof for it. So again, not a great look for Cuomo, and despite the fact that he wasn't prosecuted, I think the damage is done, and there's no way he could ever run as a serious candidate against corruption. Since 2016, there has been a pretty stark divide between the two wings of the Democratic Party, the progressives and the establishment. So, one thing that you would need to do to secure the nomination, or at least the easiest path, would be to be able to appeal to both sides of that divide. And the problem with Andrew Cuomo is, despite being a self-styled progressive, he has literally no one on the left fooled. He has had to face two primary challenges during his time as governor. In 2014, he was challenged by Zephyr Teachout. He managed to win there, and he won pretty convincingly, but still it was a fairly strong challenge, considering that he's a Cuomo in New York. And this year, he's facing a stronger challenge from Cynthia Nixon. She also is to his left, and she has been hitting him up and down the board. The last poll showed him leading her 59-23, but that was a few months back. And in the meantime, Cuomo has had more revelations. He's made the comment about America was never great, which was booed by a friendly audience, by the way. And he has also gotten his ass handed to him in a debate or two by Cynthia Nixon. So this might end up being a stronger challenge than a lot of people in the mainstream press are making it out to be. And in fact, he might lose and not secure a third term as governor. At any rate, though, the main takeaway for this video is that for many progressives, actually I'd say pretty much all progressives, Cuomo is a disappointment, and he has not been nearly as progressive as one would expect in a blue state like New York. Nixon has really attacked Cuomo on a variety of grounds. He hasn't fixed the New York subway. Now he's trying to scramble to do something. Now he's finally being called out for it. He also has not set up a single-payer healthcare system in New York, which is something that a lot of people there want. He usually tries to put off these kind of liberal reforms by saying that he's waiting for it to happen at a federal level. But that really just isn't good enough anymore, especially when we have gridlock in Washington and a Republican president. So basically, Cuomo right now is really scrambling to move left and try to portray himself as a lifelong progressive. One of the things he claims that he'll do in his third term if he's elected is to implement tuition-free college in the state of New York for everyone whose parents make under $125,000 a year. But given his record on fighting corruption, I don't know how many people will take his offer seriously or see him as a viable vehicle of progressive change. So, as I mentioned earlier, Cuomo's immediate political goal is to secure a third term as New York's governor. And in this effort, he is being aided by the Human Rights Campaign. So, it kind of makes sense the Human Rights Campaign would back him in a general sense. After all, he helped to bring about legalized gay marriage in the state back during his first term as governor. However, there are some suspect things about the Human Rights Campaign that have become apparent since it achieved its main goal. So, in 2016, the Human Rights Campaign endorsed Hillary Clinton over Bernie Sanders, which, if your main goal is to promote gay rights, that is clearly a bad move. Hillary Clinton only accepted the idea of gay marriage in 2013. She evolved once the polls hit 51%. So, she clearly is not a true ally. She's a summer soldier. Bernie Sanders, however, has been speaking out about these issues since at least the 90s, if not before. There are clips on YouTube of him debating Republicans on the floor of the House, talking about how they need to respect the service of gay servicemen and not try to out them or ruin their careers when these people are willing to serve their country. So, this is something that is a pretty clear-cut choice, I think. If you really cared about those issues, you would support Bernie over Hillary. No-brainer. And they didn't. And that's suspect to me. So it makes me think that they are playing to power and money. Fast forward to 2018. As I said, Cuomo does have a good record, and I could see them backing him legitimately. However, if we consider who his opponent is, it starts to be a little more suspect. Cynthia Nixon is a queer woman with a much stronger record on LGBTQ rights than Cuomo. She is someone who's been an activist on these issues for many years. She's been very outspoken, and I believe she even worked with the Human Rights Campaign at one point. So, if I were running the Human Rights Campaign, my thought would be to stay neutral in this race. After all, you have two very strong allies, two very strong candidates you can trust. Why choose between them? But for some reason, the HRC backed Cuomo, and they did it early. Seems kind of suspect. The main differences between Cuomo and Nixon are not on gay rights. However, most of those the differences are economic. Nixon is well to Cuomo's left. So it makes me think that the Human Rights Campaign, despite its supposed purpose of promoting gay rights, actually is functioning as a wing of the Democratic establishment. And really, there's a pattern of this. And if we look at what the Democratic establishment likes to do when fighting progressives, the thing that they really love to do, and it's ironic that the initials for the Human Rights Campaign are the same as the initials for Hillary Rodham Clinton, is that their main tactic is to attack progressives by using identity. So normally what they'll do is if they're running a minority or female candidate against a white man, they'll say that this white man is exercising privilege and needs to be put in his place, and that we need to promote minority and women voices. However, in this case, they're doing the opposite. Nixon is a woman and queer, and they're completely ignoring that. So it's very opportunistic and it's completely disingenuous the way that the neoliberal side of the Democratic Party exercises identity politics. It's based solely on economics, but it's disguised as a bunch of social identity bullshit. At any rate, the HRC now seems to be an instrument for promoting exactly that kind of politics. And their endorsement of Cuomo, therefore, protects him from being attacked on an identity basis. And that is the purpose that they're serving in this race. So just to recap my previous points before we move to our conclusion, Cuomo is corrupt to the bone despite having run against corruption. He engages in identity politics, which is increasingly unpopular, and he is very clearly part of the neoliberal wing of the party. All of these things mean that he has not a great chance in 2020. If we add into that the America was never great comment, then things look even worse, although it becomes academic at that point. What makes it even more academic, however, is that Cuomo is establishment to the core. He is someone who worked under Bill Clinton for 8 years, including serving as a cabinet secretary for 4 of those years. And I just don't see how Cuomo could differentiate himself from other candidates or really make himself out to be anything other than another Clinton clone. He is clearly on the Clinton wing of the party, and he has been for his entire career. I don't see him being able to perform enough mental gymnastics to portray himself otherwise. In 2020 polls where Cuomo is included, this requires us to ignore more serious candidates who might actually have a chance. Sherrod Brown doesn't get included nearly as much, even though he has a much better chance of being nominated. Sherrod is much better positioned, fits the public mood much better, is from a swing state, has a lot of things going for him that Cuomo doesn't. Also, there are no corruption probes surrounding Sherrod Brown, which is a pretty big thing. And Sherrod Brown has spoken out against outsourcing, something else that's a big issue right now. So anyway, I just don't see why Cuomo's worth talking about, and I made this video to hopefully bury him once and for all. And just to underline the point of how establishment Cuomo is, his father, Mario Cuomo, was the governor before him, and his brother Chris is a CNN anchor whose main job at this point seems to be challenging progressives on socialism and asking them how to pay for things. So he's done this to Bernie Sanders and to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. He's broken out chalkboards, and he's been very critical of them. But when he has some sort of warmonger come on and talk about how we need to increase the military budget, he just nods his head politely and says, yep. So again, Chris Cuomo, neoliberal hack, and so is his brother Andrew, and that's why Andrew will not be a major contender in 2020, and he will never be president of the United States, barring some sort of fascist coup.